Welcome back, everybody. It is a beautiful day here in Georgia, and if you're just now joining us, well, this channel, we do a little bit of everything on it, including pinball, DIY, machining, and a little bit of automotive. And we have just finished up not too long ago the Barndominium. Now, the age-old question of how much did it cost, or can I build this Barndominium for this price? Is it cheaper building a Barndominium? We're going to answer those questions in this video, so let's get to it. So before we actually get to the numbers, let's talk a little bit about why this isn't always necessarily going to be the case for anybody. I mean, you can, what we built this place for, you could build it a couple $100 grand more, and I ain't gonna say you could build a couple $100 grand less, but you could build it, you could build it a good bit less too, depending on the finishing. See, that's the big thing in a house is, really your structural cost is kind of your cheap points of getting the place up and framed up and built. The money comes into it when you start putting in your furnishings and stuff. While I give you these numbers, we're going to hit mainly just some of the higher price points of stuff that you may do it cheaper, you may do it more. There's so many factors, but I figured we're going to squash it all out on what this building cost to give some people some ideas of what this one actually costs. We are in Georgia and we're just south of Atlanta. And this, we did not hire a contractor. So before you get started, at least here we have what's known as impact fees. Now for our county, it's part of the permitting process. I think it's based on square footage and like the number of bedrooms and bathrooms type deal. In this case, we ended up with just under $2,500 just for the impact fees alone. Now what that money actually goes to, well, probably goes to somebody's back pocket, but needless to say, you have to pay that as the permitting fee. Not to mention, we did have a $500 fee that we had to pay initially to go to a meeting in order to get approved for this thing. Now the well, see, that's another big thing. We are on a well. We didn't do county water. We actually don't get county water here, but a well, that ran $6,500 for us. That was a big cost. That can vary and fluctuate a good bit depending on how deep they have to drill. Just for instance, when I built my house, I think we're about 2 years apart. Well, we're about 2 years apart from when I built my house to when we started the Barndominium, and we're next door. And my well was $4,500 back then, and now it's $6,500 for basically the same well. It went up $2,000. Now septic, we are also on a septic tank. Now we had a good friend that actually did the labor on putting this in. We traded out some stuff, so I don't have the labor number on this one, but just for instance, the tank cost $1,500, and then the rest of we did infiltrator systems. That was another $2,600. Now, I will tell you, when I built my house, when I had my septic tank put in, exact same size septic tank that we put over there, 1,500 gallons, and I think we were pretty close to the same size on the septic drain lines. Mine was $4,500 back then, and that was completely installed. I let those guys handle it. They came in and did it, and not gonna would have not had any issues with it. Now concrete, that is a huge cost in this build at roughly just over $46,000. Now we did this in 2 stages. The first stage is we poured the main slab itself, 60 by 90. Now we did not spare on the thickness of the concrete, going 5.5 all the way through. We could have saved a little bit of money doing 4, well, technically 3.5, where the house portion is, and then leaving the shop portion 5.5. But no, we decided to go 5.5 all the way through, so we never would hopefully ever have any issues with it. Now the building. So this is another big area that you can have a huge swing in fluctuation of prices, because when you talk about Barndominiums, you can build it as a pole barn style, which is wood post, wood frame, wood trusses, and all that. You could also, some people are doing really a stick built house and calling it a Barndominium, which is no more than traditional built walls. I mean, it's nothing. It's not a post frame type structure or anything of that nature. You also have the tubular structures that I'm not a fan of, and I used to be in that industry, and we can do a whole nother video on that. I personally do not and would not build a house out of one of them. And then you have the red iron, which is what we have. This building is a 60 by 90, 16-foot eave height. We have a 412 pitch. We had to have a 412 pitch for the county. anything that had a living structure in it or living structure has to be at least a 412 pitch. Now, this building, when we talk about it, we had it priced with a standing seam roof, a commercial standing seam roof is what it is. It is basically like the standing seam you see on a house, but it's a much bigger, a little bit bigger panel, and it's thicker, so it should last, hopefully. We also added on the cost of the wainscoting around the bottom to give it two-tone. You could save a little bit there by only doing the wainscoting on the front if you wanted to, but it really wasn't a huge price difference to do that. And just for aesthetic purposes, just make it all the same. Now, the price of this also includes 10 frame outs for windows. We had 3 doors that were included in the price, which are still commercial doors. We had those included in it. We had 2 garage door frame outs and a regular walk-in door frame out. And the price for the building alone, this does not include installation or anything of that nature, was $94,000. Now let's talk about the fact of what it costs to install that building. So the price that we paid to get that building installed was $32,000. Now that included them installing the windows and the walk-in doors. It did not include the roll-up doors by any means, but it included the windows, the walk-in doors. Now, let's jump to the inside where we did all the framing. Me and my dad did all the framing ourselves, so there was no labor involved in that. And just in the trusses alone that we used, we had over $11,000 in trusses. The entire ceiling of the first floor is a complete web truss design. We've got it to where we span actually 23, almost 24 foot in the living area there. Now let's talk about plumbing. So I do feel like we, for lack of better terms, got bent over on the plumbing. So my dad hired his friend to come do the rough in, and the rough in cost. Now when I say rough in, none of the water lines go through the concrete. So we actually did all that through the walls. And the rough in was literally only pipe, the drain pipes was it. That was the rough in. That nothing else. And boy, and this didn't include the septic or none of that. This is literally just the rough in. And mind you, this is only a 2.5 bath house. The rough in with his friend price, $7,000 alone just for that. Now, if you take in the rest of the plumbing, not including the fixtures, that was an additional $8,000 on top of that for the finished plumbing. And that was basically the rest of the rough in and all the hookups of all the fixtures and stuff that were purchased. All right, so the next big item we're going to discuss is electrical. And we did all the, I say we, my dad actually did all the electrical in this house himself. Ended up with a little over $6,000 in materials alone. Now we ran all 12 2-wire, was the minimum, 20 amp breakers everywhere, bare minimum. We also included, this includes some of the lights that we had for the back shop area. This doesn't include any of the house fixtures though, but we were just over $6,000 in that. Another big cost is sheetrock. And for this case, we ended up spending just over $11,000 for the sheetrock. Take into the fact of what cabinetry cost. Boy, that can swing hugely. And I feel like we got a pretty decent, okay deal on the cabinetry. The cabinetry for this house ended up running just over $28,000. Now, granted, there's another big cost that you can swing a few $1,000s each direction by all means very, very easily. And in this case, we didn't go with a super high end, didn't go with a super low end. We were kind of in the middle of the road, and it was just under $10,000. Now, that does include the sink for the kitchen, the sink in the bar, the sink in the guest bathroom, and the two sinks, in the master bath. So it was just under $10,000 for that. Insulation, another huge cost in the building. So the entire building is completely insulated with spray foam. Now there has been a big debate of whether or not you can spray directly to metal with open cell. Now I will say it depends on the manufacturer, what they specify, and your location. Now for us, we had verified, double checked everything. We could spray directly to panel. Now, what we did to get ready for that was a huge, huge undertaking. So we actually went through and put closure strips at every end joint, making sure that we had everything sealed off at the top and bottom. We also seamed every panel. We literally taped over every single seam. So that way, you never could have the spray foam penetrate and push out the panel, because if you don't seal up properly, you can have that foam expand outside of the building if you're not careful. Now we got all that done. We also still came back and insulated the house portion from the shop portion on top of that. Now the back wall that adjoins and the game room actually itself is completely encapsulated with rock wool, but it is also rock wool between the house and the shop portion. Now between the actual house ceiling, I guess you would say, and the floor of the storage up above is just regular batten insulation. Now, the one thing we had to come back and do for the inspector was go around the outer perimeter of where the building, or where the house portion met the building, and we had to put fireproofing insulation there. Not a huge issue. But the entire cost to insulate this thing with spray foam was just under $24,000. Now, heating and air. So we had fought with trying to figure out how or what we were going to do on this heating and air system. People were recommending, some of them were saying, hey, go with the mini splits. I personally hate mini splits. I mean, I've never owned them, but I don't like them. I don't like the way they look. I've been in places that have them, and I'm sure they're probably not set up properly, but I don't feel like they cool properly. And you still don't get me to believe that you can put everything out in this one spot and cool an entire area evenly. I just disagree. I don't like it personally. I know everybody's got their opinion on it, but that's just my opinion. Now, we ended up going with 2 RUD systems for this thing, and they're probably a little bit of an overkill, but we planned on the game room with all the games on and having people in there. We wanted to make sure that we were never going to be uncomfortable in there. So that game room alone and the bathroom that is attached to it has a 2-ton unit. Now, the rest of the house is heated and cooled by a 3-ton unit. Now, both of these units are heat pumps made by RUD, and hopefully they're going to last for a while. They came with a 10-year warranty. Now that cost was $14,600. It's just a hair under that, but around $14,600 to do the heating and air. Now the glass for the shower, that was another big thing. Now this includes the glass that was used in the smaller shower as well, but the main shower and that little shower was $4,500 for that. Now let's talk flooring. That is another big thing that you can swing quite a few $1,000s easily if you're not careful. And well, for us in this case, we spent just over $5,600 for the flooring. Now that does not include install. We actually installed it ourselves, so we didn't have to take on that extra added cost, but the flooring alone was $5,600, which is an LVP life proof is what we ended up using. We went with a thicker mill wear layer, the 22 mil wear layer, so it ended up working out very well, very easy to go down, and has held up well so far. All right, now another big cost is garage doors. Now this one we have a 16 by 8, 16 wide, 8 tall, and we also have a 14 by 14 door, and that price ended up putting us back about $11,200 just for 2 roll-up doors. Now that does include the motors, and these are actually a side mount and a high, I think they call them like a high track on the one. It kind of goes more straight up before it actually cuts back. But yes, $11,200. Now we take a step to the outside. The porch that we put on here was not part of the building package. We didn't go steel. There's a whole another thing that I can get into on that. I actually put a link in the description down below going back to the porch build. The porch is technically freestanding of the building. It is tied in a few places that keep it to where everything moves coherently together if it does move, but it's basically freestanding of its own weight. Now that porch material cost, along with the labor to install that porch, was just over $10,400. Now honestly, that was money well spent. Those guys knocked that porch out within a day and a half, and they would have knocked it out in a day if they didn't have to leave early the first day, but they knocked it out and did a fabulous job. Now that porch is built, the main beams and the main post are all cypress. Now the rafters and purlins, that was material that the installer actually provided, and that includes the metal roof. And they did a fabulous job too, because we didn't want to cut the metal and go into the building. So what we wanted to do was keep that separate, and so we ended up having them cut trim to lay up against the building and just caulk it. Yes, it's not a great long-term solution to an extent. You may have to recaulk it, but we never have to worry about it leaking into the building. If it ever develops a leak, it literally leaks between the building and the porch, and there's nothing on that right there that can get rotted or anything like that. If it leaks a little bit, it's just literally going to drip onto the porch, and that's it. So not a huge deal. Now, Before we get this final number, let's talk about all the things that we did ourselves for you to understand what we actually did. The framing labor, my dad and I did all that. No cost in that. The electrical labor, no cost. Dad did all that. The flooring labor, no cost. We did all that. All the trimming and the doors on the interior, all that stuff, we did all that. So there was no cost of labor in that. And all the miscellaneous things of hanging your closet rods and shelving and all that stuff, we did all that labor. So none of that is included in this number because we didn't have that. So if you were to look at this thing, to build this thing out, now this is 1,800, just over 1,800 square foot of living space. We have a 60 by 90 building. Basically, $395,000 is what this building costs. That is the entire structure that you see with the building, with the porch, the 1,800 and some odd square foot that you have. It's technically a 1-bedroom, 2.5 bath, but that's because we have a huge game room. Now, we do have complete storage over the entire main house. Now, the age-old question is it cheaper to build a barndominium than a house? Well, honestly, that answer is it's really about the same to build, whether you build a stick-built house or you build a barndominium, because it also, I say that, but it also goes back to depending on how much storage space you build. There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a barndominium is actually cheaper than a house. But honestly, I feel like you're probably going to end up washing out about the same whether you build the house and a barn separate versus building a barn and then the house inside of it. So you end up, I think, washing out about the same if you were to take square footage into factor and all that. But now that's going to do it for this one, guys. So we've got more coming up. I do plan on doing a video talking about some of the unexpected things that you may not realize or think about when you build your barndominium or house. And well, I've built enough now that I've kind of learned some of the stuff, and I'm going to share with you guys in a future video. So stay tuned for that one. But that's going to do it for this one. We'll catch you next time.